Well, welcome back to our park just over the road from where we live here in central London. Actually, after a few days that have been cold and wet, sleeting, we haven't had the snow that some in the UK have had, but it's not been a nice time. It's the first time really we've been out where it's been nice, although cool and cold with a bit of a wind. So I'm back out here because in essence that's where life happens, not in the coolness, the safety, the simplicity of a study where everything is put in order and you put your hand to everything. It's out here where there's noise, there's chaos, there's movement, everything is shifting, things appear. That's life, wherever you may be. And so what has the psalmist got to say to us in the midst of life? Well, we've been trying to work that out over these last weeks. We started with "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And we looked at that, and then we've looked at how the Hebrew poetry has sort of expanded on that. We talked a bit about the fact of the sufficiency of God, that he leads us into places where there is enough sufficient for the day. We talk about green pastures. But in the context of the shepherd in Israel, those green pastures were few and far between. It wasn't like going to another field. He would have to trek. We talked about the cool waters, the still waters, away from the raging waters that would be a danger. We talk about the making of those still waters as well as the finding of those still waters, so that there is a constant provision. We talked about the paths of righteousness and the fact that in Hebrew thinking, the paths of righteousness are those paths that have been made over the centuries, over history, that in the midst of a land which is dangerous, where the ground can move underneath your feet at any time, the paths are those things that have been trodden that have proved themselves sufficient and safe for the journey. In many ways, when we look into Hebrews and we look at the story in Hebrews 11 of what does it mean to have faith, we're looking at those paths of righteousness. We're looking today at what it means when the psalmist says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." It's how many of us read that verse and remember that verse. It's read differently in some more modern translations. A more specific translation would not be the shadow of the valley of death, but it would be in the shadows of a dark valley. And we'll be looking at what that means. But I want to start off by just sharing with you something that if we're not careful, we as Christians, especially if we have a propensity for a prosperity idea that everything should be good because we're faithful, and if we're not faithful, then bad things happening to us are a result of our unfaithfulness. I want us to be aware that in the midst of Scripture, actually, there's a recognition of the inevitability of difficulty and of challenge, of the hardships of life. In some ways, it's captured better in the old ways of talking. "Yea, though I walk through I will walk through." There's an inevitability, there's an assurance that I will face those challenges. Whereas in some modern translations, it's been sort of diluted a little bit, and "even though I walk," which gives a bit more of a sense that perhaps I won't. Whereas the psalmist is talking about the inevitability of the challenge and of the difficulty. What does he mean by the valley of the shadows, of the places of darkness? Now, in many ways, they would be finding their best lands on the top of mountains, on the top of hills and whatever. But every so often, in order to get from one place to another, to get from A to B, they would have to go through a valley between two mountains that were unscalable, unclimbable. And the thing is, you would move from the position of being surrounded by the ability to see everything to move into a place where you see so little. All you can see are the walls and sometimes the closeness of those walls to you. That's your horizon. That's the depth of your world is the difference between the wall and the wall on the valley sides. And in the valley, it's not a simple path. It's not laid out like some national park. It's full of rubble and it's full of stones, and it's where floods have happened and carried down all the waste of the land, and it's not a safe place, and you have to scrabble along to find your way out through the valley. And you come out at the hope of the other end. But it's also a place, because of the horizons, it's also quite claustrophobic. You don't feel as if you're in control. You feel as if you're watching for something. You feel as if anything can happen at any time. You're waiting maybe for the water that has brought down some of these rocks to come down, and it doesn't have to be raining where you are. It can be raining far away. And by the time the water comes down and it comes through this gushing valley that has been formed through many years of the water coming down, you could be in a very dangerous position. So it's a place where you feel insecure, where your horizons are so small. And so in the midst of that kind of scenario, it's also a place where the light rarely gets. Now, you can go to some scholars and you can get a different idea. There are some scholars who talk about the fact that just around Jerusalem there were two valleys, the valley of Kidron and the valley of Hinnom. And there were two valleys that were well known as part of the difficulty of the history of Israel. They were part of the sacrifices of children, not just of animals, in the years gone past. And in fact, if you go into the valley of Hinnom, and in Jewish it's Gehinnom, valley of Hinnom. In Greek it becomes Gehenna, which in many translations is changed to hell, our idea of hell. It's a place where it was rubbish and it was dirt, and then there was fire burning all the time. It was where people got rid of stuff. And it was a place of absolute dirtiness, and you didn't want to pass through it. As we're going through Easter and Lenten time, also there are those who would say in order for Jesus to get to the Mount of Olives, to get into Jerusalem, he would have had to pass through that valley. So there are some who would say that actually it is a particular valley, a particular place with a particular identity and a particular history, a particularly sinful place that is full of tragedy and of pain, of wrong thinking. I prefer to go with the view, in my perspective, that it's about those places where I find myself having to travel through, where my horizons become much more limiting, where the sun seems far away and I walk in shadows, concerned because I cannot see, concerned with what might happen elsewhere, how might I get caught up in that. And the tragedy is that affects us all in so many different ways. As somebody in ministry, I've had to sit down with so many people talking about the death of a spouse, death of a child, death of a parent. And this is not just about death, but it's about the fact that in those moments, your world constricts and contracts. So all you can see is the pain, all you can see is the loss. There are many others, people losing their job, not understanding or wondering what's going to happen next. How are they going to afford their mortgage? How can they afford their home? How can they afford the food? How can they understand what the future is going to be when their world has changed because their job has gone? Health. What about when you're given that news where your world changed in a moment? Cancer. Tragedy of in a moment being told that your world is going to feel very different and have to be coped with very different. These are the valleys that, for me, the psalmist is talking about, where all of a sudden the world constricts and we feel limited. We can almost just reach out and touch the sides, such as the limiting factor of our world. But what does the psalmist say? Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, it's very interesting in looking at this, that if you look at the picture of Tutankhamun, who was an Egyptian prince, an Egyptian king who died, a pharaoh, and look at the pictures of the pharaohs, they have held a cross in their tombs, a staff and a crook. And it was taken to mean that there were two particular roles that the pharaohs had. It was that of protection and that of provision. The staff would be used to poke in those places that might be dangerous, to make sure that there wasn't a snake there or something hidden. It would be used that if they were being attacked, the staff would be used to keep away. It would be a way of protecting. The crook, it would be a means to bring the sheep back into the fold. It would be a means of just guiding them, to keep them in a safe place, to stop them wandering into different areas where the shepherd might not yet have checked. So it was an age-old tradition. It wasn't a Hebrew picture, thy rod and thy staff. It was an age-old picture of the responsibility shown in the pharaohs that would be very distinct in the minds of the Hebrews. That there was a responsibility in the kingship of God to provide and protect them, to surround them, to bring them in line, to allow them to walk through their darkest places, and to be there in order for them to get to the other side. And on the other side, their horizons would once again open. I remember once we were on holiday and we drove through the Cheddar Gorge. And at first it was wide and we were driving through and you felt very easy, you could enjoy the atmosphere. But then as it got deeper and deeper into the gorge and the sides of the gorge became a little bit closer, you began to have to concentrate on where you were driving, watch the roads, because if you didn't watch the roads and concentrate, you could have an accident. And then it opened up again at the other end of the gorge, and I'm only talking about 10 minutes drive. But there was just that little sense of relief as the sides opened up gradually and you came out of that place of shadows, that place of limiting, and you again stepped into a place where you could see, you could feel safer. Well, the psalmist is trying to tell us that in the midst of those places, however that may be, in our studies, in our working, in our health, in our faith, whenever we get to those places where our world gets smaller, the Lord comes closer and leads us through those places until we reach the place where once again we see the light and we feel in ourselves more able to enjoy life again. Whatever your circumstances, I want you to be assured that yea, though I walk through the valley of deep shadows, I fear no evil. Not that it won't be there, but I fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff. His protection, his presence, his provision, they comfort me. May we hold on to that. God bless you.
The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.